All right. Thank you. Welcome. I'm very happy that you decided to join me in this room. I wasn't expecting a full room, though. Thank you. Today is a day packed with full interesting topics, speakers and presentations. But first, a little of me. I'll introduce myself in a bit. But first, I want to know who's in the room. So can I have some hands for architects? Yes, it's the one. Yeah, a few hands. Software developers? Yes. Software testers? Anyone? Sort of? Yeah? Cool. Scientists? Nice. Data engineers? Yes, cool. Thank you. Pygrunn veterans? Oh, not that many. Wow. Okay. And of course, everyone else I forgot who's still here, so thank you for coming. So, first a little bit of introduction. Last year, October, I switched jobs to join X2 event. And over the years, as you're working, you accumulate a lot of tools into your tool belt. I always mention myself with like a carpenter tool belt full of tools, like a hammer, screwdriver, whatnot. Of these tools, some of them you really like because they're really good at the job that you want them for. And others, they are just, well, the only tool that you can use for a certain thing. One of the tools I really like is Sentry. If you don't know Sentry, Sentry is an application that you can use to track errors in your application. So what you do, you have a Sentry running somewhere, you instrument your application to send any exception that occur to Sentry, and Sentry gives you a nice error report with context information, so you can start debugging the error that occurred. When I joined Access2 event, we were using Sentry, but not for Python. And I was really surprised because over the years I've worked with only in Python, and every Python developer that application that I was using Sentry for the backend. But we were only using for the front end, and even then we only had 2 front end applications, so there wasn't that much in there. So I explained to René, my colleague, like, hey, we can use Sentry for the Python application. Like, okay. But first I asked, how do you know if there are any errors in your application? Yeah, we look at log files. Log files? What? We're using Kubernetes, so there are a lot of pods running around. What? How? Yeah, we use Loki to aggregate all the log files, and then we use Grafana to look into the Loki log files. So, luckily, I knew Sentry, so we introduced that over the weeks that followed. And then we had to fine-tune our logging a little bit, because if you do a logger.exception, it goes to Sentry. And if you then raise the exception afterwards, and it is accepted again, then you get multiple errors of the same stack trace. So Sentry is just an example of one of the many tools that are out there. Perhaps you joined a company and that you had the tool in your tool belt that the company wasn't using, but it was really good for the situation they were in. They were missing something, or they were running into a snag, like, we don't know how to solve this, and you had the tool to solve this. But it could also be the other way around, that you joined the company and they had a tool and it became your new BFF because it was the tool that you were missing. You didn't know, but you were missing it. So my talk today is not just about tools, it's centralized about tools, but also a little bit about the culture aspects that are surrounding that, that I feel are involved with making developers happy. So first, a little bit about myself. I tried to keep it short. I'm Peter. I live in Zuidhoorn, which is a small village here next to Groningen. I live there with my wife and 2 boys. If you think programming is hard or logic is hard, try raising kids. I studied computer science here at the Hans University. During the studies, we were learning to program using Java. But one of the first internships I did was a company that was using Python. So that was my first touch of Python, and it was love in first sight. I hope many of you recognized it. No offense to Java, of course, but I really like Python. I started working as a support/developer, centralizing all the support in the company into one person. Before that, everybody was sort of responsible for support. And as you know, if everybody's responsible, nobody really feels responsible, and stuff keeps laying around. I started working in Plone. I've seen some faces who used Plone in the past. And later on also Django. Besides doing the support, I also did a lot of server maintenance on our servers. So setting up new services, regulating the deployment to servers. But back then it was all manual labor. So you logged into the server, git pull, and later we used Fabric for that. But yeah, a lot of manual stuff. After a while, I switched jobs, and I took a really deep dive into Django, also using MySQL. And before I left the company, they were they were creating new microservices using Fast API and AWS, I think. At X2 Event, we mostly work with, I work on the backend. We're using Flask, using SQL Alchemy and MySQL. And we also have a message queue using Ameco and RabbitMQ. So far for us, it's working quite well. We're still a startup, so it might be that in a few years we switch to a different tool, whatever fits our situation at the time. One thing that I did learn over the years is that all I know is that I know nothing. Meaning that I think it's good to be humble in your approach. That if someone says something different, it might be that they have a good case and not ignore it right away. So, deep dive. Are you happy? Of course, I'm talking about work happiness. If you're happy in your personal life, I don't know. I'm not qualified to help you there. But it's a million-dollar question. Of course, you can tell yourself that work happiness is not the most important thing for you. And you're probably right, because it shouldn't be the sole pillar of your happiness. But then again, it shouldn't be the anchor dragging you down either. Balance is key. I've been in both positions, where I went to work whistling, with a smile on my face, imagining the work day ahead of me, thinking of all the things I could be doing, the bantering with colleagues. But I've also been in at the other extreme, where I had trouble getting myself out of bed to go to work, because I was either not happy at my work, or that the situation at the work floor was just not okay. So my talk is not about this sort of happiness, because it's really deep, and I don't know enough about that. But I do think it's important to make up the balance every now and then for yourself, to realize, am I happy at my job? Is there things that I can change? If there are things you can change, try to do so, try to introduce new tools, and otherwise make up the balance and perhaps make the hard decision to leave. I do believe that if you're like me, you probably stick around far longer than other people might, because I think that developers are a loyal bunch. You like where you're working, why change? And we don't like big changes that much, do we? So worker happiness, it's hard to figure out what influences that and what not. Looking at myself, what makes me a sad panda? Well, I'm a developer to the bone, so what I want to do all day is make cool new features, or make code go faster. And of course, automate everything. Because like I said, I don't like doing manual stuff. Of course, there are always chores that need to be done. Every company has the chores that you need to done, that upgrading servers, certain meetings that, well, okay, we'll do it because the other guy wants it that much. But yeah, it doesn't help you. For me, I also really hate the feeling of not being productive. So if Renee asks me at the end of the day, how was your work day? And like, yeah, I'm stuck. I really hate that feeling, because I want to move forward and I want to make new stuff. But not feeling productive can have so many causes. It could be that you're stuck in something because it's complex, or the ticket was just the tip of the iceberg, and when you started working on it, there was so much more involved than you first anticipated. But it could also be that you're being distracted the whole time. Because when I started doing support, started working and as a support guy, if the phone rang, it was probably for me. A client that had an issue or a question or whatever, which meant I had to switch context. And if you know context switching, you always lose time. There's so much overhead involved. Another thing that I find annoying is that people who do not have a sense of ownership, meaning that you made a certain piece of code and it broke in production for whatever reason, and then me or another support person comes to you like, hey, why did you make this code? Or did you anticipate the situation? No, we didn't anticipate it. So okay, bye. Wait, whoa. And they're already gone. They're on to their next cool new feature, which they might break. So what I want to prevent in this situation is a blame game. I don't want to blame them for the mistake they made. I want to get them sitting next to me, helping me figure out why did this code break and how can we together ensure it doesn't happen again. So yeah, that's something that you can improve in your company. And of course, manual steps. But luckily, we're developers, so that's something that we can influence very deeply. Okay, time for something more fun. What are the basics you should be looking for? Of course, this is a very short list, and if I'm going to ask you, what do you need as a developer, you probably raise your hand and there will be dozens of points on this sheet. I tried to boil it down to some basic points that I feel should sort of encompass everything. Of course, I'm not mentioning processes here. It's sort of a conscious choice not to, because I'm not talking about processes today. I think that hardware is a clear enough one. You don't want to be waiting on your computer. You don't want to be waiting on your CI or your CD to complete. So having a really good computer is really key to making your being a happy developer. A team is a hard one because it's like drawing stars. If you join a company, you might be lucky and have a really good team full of seniors or other people who can teach you things, or at the very least have people around you where you can have fun and laugh with. But you can also influence it a little bit because you can join team outings. You can talk to your colleagues. You don't have to be on your island, like your desk, and not talk to other people. That could work, but I would advise against it. Culture, I'll touch a little bit on it more later. But first, tools. All right, big away the tools. So a little birdie told me not to use too many bullet points, and I tried to. This is already the third iteration. First, the whole screen was full of bullet points, so this is reasonably okay, I think. So first off, your local environment. One of the tools that I really like is PyEnv. If you don't know PyEnv, it's a Python version manager, which basically allows you to install multiple Python versions on your local computer. Having done so manually by hand in the past, I can really tell you that PyEnv is a godsend gift. Compiling Python is not fun. PyEnv can also manage your virtual envs for you. I know that Renee is using that. I haven't done so so far, but because I use virtual env wrapper for that, and I was using virtual env wrapper before I was using PyEnv, so I kind of stick to the tool that I know works best for me. And of course, you need a good editor. I think many of you have your own personal preference of what you think is a good editor. I use Sublime Text. It works for me. It's really lightweight. But I know that at my previous company, I think there were four or five different EDAs being used. So whatever floats your boat, just make it work. Code formatting and code styling is always a really hot topic. If you look at a piece of code and I ask yourself, what would you do different? I'm probably sure there will be like, how many, 80 people's, 80 different opinions, how we should be formatting that code. As a developer, if you're reviewing other people's code, you don't really want to have to think about how they formatted the code. Or at least, I'm not looking forward to reviewing code that is inconsistent in code style. So the tools that can help you there are Black. If you don't know Black, it's a Python code formatter. It's called Black because Henry Ford once said when he was making his first Ford car, you can have this Model T, I think it's called, in any color as long as it's black. So Black is really unforgiving. It formats the code in one way, and that's it. And iSort is a tool that you can use to sort the imports at top level of your Python file. Of course, iSort has many configurations that you can do how the each import is sorted in each block. But honestly, why bother? Because I think that the import should be at top level. They should be in a consistent way. And I think the Black and iSort will help you there. Of course, you still might want to use Flake 8 or PEP 8. And these are the Python style guide. They enforce the Python style guide rules. And there are so many rules to choose from. If you're not using it, start using it and start small. Because there are dozens of rules and some are conflicting, which we found out when we started using Black. There are some certain Flake 8 rules which contradict what Black does for you. So make a conscious choice in that. The reason that I mentioned Black is that at my previous company, we had, I just asked, they now have 2 code style guides, which are Google documents explaining to you as a developer how you should be formatting your code. I know that back in the days in the Plone community, there was a similar document explaining how you should be styling your code. As a senior developer, when reviewing a code, I'm really not interested in how your code is formatted. I don't want to think about it. I just want to be it consistent. So what Black does for you is format it in a certain way and be done with it. So it helps you be consistent. There's little room for personal preferences, and you can focus on important things, which is mainly the logic, the code that you are writing. Finally, I also wrote testing. I think that was mentioned in the previous talk as well. You should be testing, and if you're not, start small. Start with making a regression test. I'm not sure how well you can test your code when you're making code that is analyzing or processing scientific data, but I can imagine that you have certain utils that you're using and that you want to be sure that this goes in and I'm expecting this out, and you want to test that. So if something breaks, you at least know it's not that part of the code that is breaking. So it's always good to test your code. So how do you incorporate all these tools into your workflow? I tried to make some workflows. You can argue that you should be writing tests first and then start developing. That's a choice you can make. For me, I pick up a ticket, I read the ticket, I start coding a little bit, and I've set up my Sublime that when I press save, my code is formatted and my imports are sorted already. And then Flake A comes along and says, well, this and that is not being used, or it could be in certain cases that Black does something strange, but that rarely happens. Then I start writing tests, and well, it's just an iteration. You write tests, you run them, they fail, you fix them, and you write more tests. Writing tests just to hit code coverage is not really testing. Then you're only testing the happy flow, and nobody is really interested in the happy flow. You want to know if customers are doing something funky, putting strings into fields where you're expecting integers. You want to know about those cases. One thing that I forgot to mention is the pre-commit hooks. There's a tool called pre-commit, which you can install, and you can list, oh, let me go back. That's the code on the right. So that is a configuration that we use for our pre-commit. Basically, it says, when I'm starting committing my code, these are the applications or the tools that are being applied to the code that I changed. So first, it's not, they run independently. So first Flake 8 runs, then Black runs, and then iSort runs. We cheated it a little bit because Black in this case is set up in such a way it doesn't check the code, but it also formats the code. And this is to accommodate some colleagues which don't have their editor set up in such a way that it formats the code. But this prevents developers from committing code that is not formatted or not running according to our linting rules. Of course, you can still evade it because you can do a git commit and then no dash verify, and it will skip the code git hooks. But then later on, you'll still get caught. So I'm done coding. I'm committing my code. The pre-commit hooks run, and then I get the feedback that my code was good or not. And if it's good, then I can push to the repository. So enough with the talking. Let's look at code a little bit, how this works. Yeah, it's quite okay. It's really hard to see from down here. Mouse. So, whoa, I can zoom out a little bit. Is it still readable at the back? Okay. So I had to look up our git commit, seeing how our code looked like before you started using Black and iSort. As you can see here, we have a bunch of imports. And as you can see, it's a bit of a mess, personally. So some imports are on multi-lines, some are not. Some have the last import on a new line. And you can't see it here. But there's the line. That is our line length, which is for us 160 characters. It's a line length that works for us. So you can see there's still some room. Let's see if this works. Oh, yes. So this is the imports after iSort went through it. So it might be hard to see the difference. Oh, wrong way. So these are the imports without sorting, and this is iSort applies. This makes me happy. because the imports are sorted, they're organized. You have your top-level Python packages at the top, then your third packages, and then your first local packages. This makes me happy. Sorry, shortcuts. And this is a little bit black. It's a bit hard to visualize black because the changes that black does on a code base are massive. So the Git commit involved, like, I think it was hundreds of changes over dozens of files. So it's hard to pick one that makes a good example. Where is it? Yes. So this looks okay, right? I mean, you could argue that it's reformatted differently. You can even make a style guide around this. But if you then look at how black would do it for you. Sorry, wrong one. Yes. Where is it? There it is. What black does for you, it looks what fits on one line. And if it doesn't fit on one line, it might try 3 lines. And if that doesn't fit, then it explodes in this format that it puts everything below each other. But then it again looks for any argument calls and looks, hey, the arguments, do they fit in one line? If so, put them in one line. I think that makes a really consistent way of formatting your code. Of course, you might not like this. That could be. But for me, when reviewing code, I know that black has run, so I know that code is formatted, so I know what to expect, and I don't have to think about it twice. I can just look at what are we doing, what filters are we applying. That is what you are looking for when you're reviewing code. You're not looking at the style guide. Who cares about the style guide? Just have your code formatted and go forward. So, at my previous company, before we were using black and ISO, we had a lot of discussions in reviews even. Like, oh, well, this is personal preferences, or can you change this code, or can you change that, or this. I think I spent too much time on that already. And once we started using black and ISort, the discussions were gone. But wait, there are more tools. Of course there are more tools. One disclaimer is that these are just the tools that I use at the moment. I know there are dozens of other tools out there. There are other tools that can do similar jobs. This is just to highlight some of the tools that I use. For your development and testing, you're either using GitLab or GitHub or another code repository. I hope anything else besides your local computer. If you're testing, you also have continuous integration, and there are various tools to help you there, like Jenkins, GitLab CI, Travis. I think even GitLab has their own flavor these days. And I think what is important to introduce is something to have immediate feedback if your continuous integration or whatever fails. Give the developer feedback like, hey, this code failed because of that. Steady. I think nowadays most of the people are using Kubernetes or something similar, a cloud solution for your deployments. So once my code has been reviewed and merged back, I don't want to think about doing manual steps to have it deployed on production. I want to have that automated. So you're using something like continuous integration. We use GitLab for this with pipelines. We're deploying to Kubernetes at DigitalOcean. And when I started working, we're still in the progress of introducing Helm. We now finished that, which meant that the footprint for the deployment per repository is just 2-3 files with 10 lines of code, and that's it. Everything else is put into the Helm chart. Once your code is deployed, you want to know how is it performing? Are there any errors occurring? So here is again a Sentry, which can help you there, because we instrumented all our application to report any issue that happens to Sentry, and we set up Sentry in such a way that we get reported in Slack like, hey, something went wrong, go look at it. So any errors we see right away. And the same goes for metrics. Like, okay, everything is up and running, but how is it performing? We don't know. So we started using, we introduced Prometheus to scrape our Flask application, but also our Kubernetes cluster. And we added more metrics for our own application, because we wanted to know how are certain functions performing, how often are they hit. And from that, we get more work, which is not really what we were looking for, but we want to improve the system. if you're using Prometheus, if you have looked at Prometheus, Prometheus is really basic. So you have a technical graph saying these are the metrics, and you can do some sum by. But here comes Grafana, which helps you visualize all the metrics into graphs or tables or whatever you need. Once you have that up and running, you might hit into performance degradation, and you want to investigate further how to solve the performance issues. In the past, I used New Relic for this. One disclaimer that it has been over 10 years since I used New Relic, and at the time when we were using New Relic, we used it on production only when the client agreed upon that we were using it, because New Relic is not lightweight. It does a lot of data gathering, which also means that it's slowing down the application. So we were investigating performance degradation, but by introducing New Relic, we introduced more performance degradation. But it was a conscious choice, because then you can really visualize what the stack trace is going through, what code is being hit, what arguments are being used, and then you certainly see that a certain functions are called a dozen of time. And sometimes the only way to realize that is by debugging really hard. I still have an email in my email box from Sentry saying, hey, we're now doing profiling. So I haven't used it yet, but I do know that Sentry is also introducing some kind of profiling. So all these two together, I think they create a safety net, which creates a safe environment for you as a developer to develop your code. You can make mistakes. And if you make a mistake and you push your code, then continuous integration will step in like, hey, this is not up to par, or you're making errors, or the tests fail. Of course, there are always workarounds, those, but once you start messing with the system, then you're also already in the process of sort of being evil. And so you can trust the system to catch any errors that you created, because if the continuous integration passes, that only means that the tests that we wrote so far are good enough. But it could still happen that you have a customer who is just using your API and sending random bits of data in the wrong fields in the wrong way, or sending no information, or trying hard to evade your security measures. Then you need something like Sentry to catch those errors and inform you about it. You can be proactive in your approach. And what I also think is that it helps create a sense of ownership. Because at the bottom, you see an example of one of our pipelines. It doesn't even fit the screen. I had to cut some parts off. But the parts that you see, that we perform linting, even on our master branch, we perform some linting issues. Then we build a Docker image that might fail for whatever reason. We run the tests. I think we have a few thousand at the moment. And then we deploy to test. And we also have a script which does test the API endpoints that we have so far on our test environments to ensure that that nothing breaks. And if that stage fails, then test might be broken, but at least we know before it goes to production, before it goes live, before our customers realize that something might be broken. If that all passes, we have a production step. For some of our application that's automated, it goes to production and you don't have to think about it. For our main API, our core application, it's a manual step, just that we have a little bit more control, but we might change it over time. I always get a bit itchy if people are talking about 1% better every day. That's because in my head, it translates to exponential growth. If you remember math class, that means that there's a graph that goes up really hard. So doing the math, I've been working for over 13 years, and that is 4,745 days. And 1% better to the power of 4,745 is 390 quadrillion, triljard in Dutch. So I know for sure that I'm not that much better than I was 13 years ago. I just know a little bit more, and I also know what not to do. But I do adhere to that because, like I said, I like automating things. I like making things go faster. I like making things go better. I like teaching other people about Python, about how to best use PyTest fixtures, whatnot. So even though I get a little bit itchy with the 1% better, or you even have the synonym like one drop in a bottle every day, and you have a full bottle of several full bottles over a year, whatever floats your boat, I think in the basis, it's a good culture thing to have. And you also don't want to be in a situation where you have a manager with sky-high expectation changing priorities. So to summarize, what makes me a happy developer? Well, first, good, fast hardware. And also having a great team around you. And there is no I in team. It's already, it's like a bad motivational poster, but it's true. And also have a good culture in your company. That might not be something you can influence, but it is something to keep in mind that, like I said, I think that the tools can help you create a healthy environment and by that a good culture in your company. And of course, you need tools. You need lots of tools. So these are just some of the tools that I've been using over the past few years. I'm sure there are many others. I mean, for project management, you have Jira, you have GitLab issues, you have any other tool, you even have Figma for designs, you have, I don't know even more about if you're working from home, like Google Meets and other collaboration tools. There are so many tools out there. The key is that you have tools and you have a tool belt. Share them with your team, share them with your company, share them with other people. Yeah, did I forget anything? No. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Are there questions from the audience?
Yeah, I do have a question. So you're talking about a lot of tools. I think most of the tools are very good that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific security tools that you would recommend?
Yes.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Oh, yeah.
So the question is there a recommendation for security tools?
Yes, that is one of the tools that I learned when I joined Access to Event. There's a tool called Bandit, and it allows you to configure certain rules that you want to check or ignore. And what it does is scan your code for certain pitfalls, like using request and not sending a timeout or other pitfalls that you might have. I'm not sure how far Bandit goes, but Bandit is a really good starting point if you want to do security tooling.
You did not mention, for example, MyPy. Would that also contribute to developer happiness, in your opinion? Thinking?
So the question is if MyPy contributes to developer happiness.
Yeah, good question. To be honest, I haven't used MyPy that much, so I'm not sure where MyPy comes in the whole picture. You were also talking about type hinting, I think. I think that type hinting also helps you make readable code. That's not something that I touched in my presentation, but I think that one of the things that I look at when reviewing code is it readable, because you made the code and another developer is reviewing your code, but he's also reading your code for the first time. So I also think that if a person is reviewing your code and he makes a remark like this is not readable code, that should be leading in that situation, because he's the second person reading your code, and if he can't understand it, then you won't be able to read it in a year from then. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Oh.